Weight loss is not all the same. If you want to lose weight in a healthy way, you want to make sure you're losing predominantly fat mass and not losing as much or any lean mass if you can. So how do we know what we're doing? Well, obviously measuring your body composition can help you determine how you're going, but are there factors that can predict whether you're more likely to lose fat or lean mass? Turns out a new study suggests insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia may be a major factor in predicting that you're more likely to lose lean mass and less likely to lose fat mass in your weight loss attempts. If this is true, this is something you really need to know about because it may change the way you see weight loss. Because if you have insulin resistance or hyperinsulinemia, if you are more likely to lose lean mass, you need to be very, very proactive about not losing that lean mass so you lose mostly fat mass. I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at DietDoctor.com, and the study I'm talking about is from Dr. David Ludwig and colleagues, titled Stimulated Insulin Secretion Predicts Changes in Body Composition Following Weight Loss in Adults with High BMI. And this was published in the Journal of Nutrition. Now, what they did for this paper was they went through and they looked at two big trials that were essentially weight loss trial. One was called the Framingham, Boston, Bloomington, Birmingham, and Baylor study, abbreviated FB4, and the other was the Framingham State Food Study. Now, these trials were different, and it's important to note how they were different and how they were similar. These trials were similar in that they both involved calorie reduction diet to produce a certain amount of weight loss within a certain amount of time. Now, they were different in that one was a moderate carbohydrate intervention and one was a very low carbohydrate intervention. And they lasted between 10 and 14 weeks. Now, it's important to define what moderate and very low carbohydrate are because those aren't always consistent in the literature. So in this FB4 study, they were provided food with 60% of the calculated energy needs, 7.5% from carbohydrates, 67.5% from fat, and 25% from protein, with a goal to achieve a 12 to 18% reduction in body weight in 14 weeks. The other study, the FS2 study, was also 60% of their energy needs, with 45% from carbohydrates, 30% from fat, and 25% from protein, with the goal being a 10 to 14% weight loss in 10 weeks. Now, why is it important to go through these differentiations? We'll talk about that. But first, let's see what the main finding was. The main finding, quite simply, was that the more insulin resistant the subjects were and the higher their insulin level, the more likely they were to lose lean mass and less fat mass. And in a way that makes sense because when you think of the role of insulin, not only does it work for moderating glucose in your blood, but it also has to do with lipolysis or being able to mobilize your fat stores to burn them for energy. And when insulin levels are high, your body has a much harder time doing that. When insulin levels are low, it has an easier time. So it makes sense. The more insulin you have, the more insulin resistant you are, the more hyperinsulinemia you have, the less fat you will be able to burn because you'll have a harder time accessing that. But the surprise then is that you would then burn more lean mass. But that's what this study suggests. It doesn't tell that that's the exact mechanism. Okay, this wasn't a mechanistic study, but it makes sense that that could be the mechanism. As this study found people with higher insulin levels and higher insulin resistance burn less fat and more muscle. And as we know, that's a problem. That is a problem because you don't want to burn lean tissue. It's much easier to gain fat mass than it is to gain lean mass. So if you're burning more lean mass and less fat mass, that's really the opposite of healthy weight loss. And that's when you also will see resting metabolic rates start to decrease, which makes weight maintenance harder down the road. And that's when you can really get into trouble with sarcopenia and weakness and other functional problems down the road. And muscle is metabolically active, right? Lean tissue is metabolically active and helps you become insulin sensitive. So important to not lose weight in the way that these subjects did. So here's the other interesting part though. Now, even though it showed the more insulin resistant you are, the more lean mass you lose and the less fat mass you lose, there was not a difference between the two studies really. And remember, one study was a very low carbohydrate study and one was a moderate carbohydrate study. So at least I would think that group in the very low carbohydrate study would have done much better and not had the same amount of lean tissue loss and less fat loss because they would be overcoming their insulin resistance and their hyperinsulinemia by eating the low carbohydrate diet. So we don't know exactly why it didn't work. Dr. Ludwig and his colleagues have some hypotheses that maybe it was the duration, but we don't know. I mean, let's just suffice it to say we don't know, but this trial wasn't designed to study that either. So that's what I think is such the interesting next step, to do a study like this, people who have hyperinsulinemia, who have insulin resistance, and then randomize them to a very low carbohydrate weight loss diet or a higher carbohydrate weight loss diet, see what happens to their hyperinsulinemia, their insulin sensitivity, and see what happens to their resulting body composition with their weight loss. But the take home from all this, I think, is that one, you need to know, do you have hyperinsulinemia? Do you have insulin resistance? And that's something that really isn't tested for enough. Now, if your weight to height, your waist circumference to height ratio is greater than 0.5, chances are you have insulin resistance and are metabolically unhealthy. If you have, elevated fasting insulin levels, that's a good marker to know. If your triglycerides are high, your HDL is low, all of these things are suggestive of insulin resistance. Certainly if your blood glucose is above 100 or your postprandials are going up, right? Those are all markers you want to know. But the key is to somehow work with your doctor, with your coach, with your clinician, with your nutritionist, with your healthcare provider to find out if you are insulin resistant. Because if you are, then you want to make sure you're taking every step to ensure that you are losing weight in a healthy way. Again, that means trying to lose fat mass and not lean mass. And that may mean doing resistance training. That may mean eating a higher than you otherwise would protein diet to make sure you're getting enough of the substrate to build and maintain your muscles with your resistance training. And I would argue that that would mean focusing on a diet that improved your insulin resistance. In many cases, that is a very low carbohydrate diet. I would argue a very low carbohydrate and at least adequate to high protein diet. And that you can monitor this by following those markers, your waist circumference to height ratio, your blood tests that I mentioned. The key is making sure you're following them. Don't just lose weight and assume all is good because the number on the scale is going down, but instead pay attention to your body composition and your healthy weight loss. And as this study shows, so important for those people who have insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. And we have guides on what is insulin resistance, how to treat insulin resistance, and on body composition and how to measure it. I think all those guides really play in well to this message. So you might want to check those out. We'll link to those down below. So if you think this was helpful, please give us the thumbs up and subscribe so you'll get all our updates here on DD News on YouTube. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.